Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mindclickers. This is your host, Lachlan, a sport and exercise scientist from Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, with a passion for esports performance, coaching, and overall positive mental well-beings. I've been in esports for quite my life, previously competing in COD4 Pro Mod and coaching StarCraft 2, whilst avidly loving CSGO and all FPS games. I created Mindclickers to provide an insight into the psychological and performance demands of elite level gaming. This includes getting an insight from coaches, players, staff, org founders, and esports researchers about their respective domains. In the following episode, I chat with Qu1ckdraw Basso, who is currently the CEO of FURYGlobal, an exciting OCE-based esports organization, who have taken it upon themselves to expand internationally into Brazil and Denmark. Joe also is a freelance broadcaster and the founder of the Oceania Esports Association. Listen to Joe talk in depth about the key foundations of building up his previous organization and the key principles that he has constructed, which has led to Fury's success. Joe also provides crucial information for those looking to enter the esports scene. It was such an exciting episode talking to Joe, and I hope you take away at least one or two really key pivotal points. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Season 2, Episode 4 of Mindclickers, where it's time to click both heads in 2021. I'm joined here today by Qu1ckdraw Basso, who is the CEO of Fury and also a freelance broadcaster. How are you going today, mate?
Yeah, I'm kind of right. It's a pleasure to be here. I've tuned into the podcast for a little while, and it's honestly a privilege to be on board. You've done great work over the last couple of episodes and the previous series, so I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, fantastic, mate. Thanks a lot for that. We've had it in discussion for a little bit, so I'm glad we've finally been able to sit down and arrange a time where you can jump on and share some stories.
Yeah, of course. It should be interesting, to say the least. I know you've had some different people on board, obviously a wide variety, so it's nice to see so many different aspects in regards to the scene that we're so involved in.
Yeah, I mean, I love the esports scene, especially in OCE, just because it's gradually developing, and it's super exciting to see that development, and obviously where it could lead into the future as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So I guess we'll kick it off how we usually kick it off. A little bit of background about yourself, and what you've been up to recently.
Yeah, so I guess my background in general. So I'm still pretty young, 19, still fresh out of high school. Graduated about 2 years ago. A lot of people think it's a bit young, I would say, to be in a CEO position, but I think it just comes to maturity, personally. Yeah, it's a bit hard to tell people that. A lot of people think I'm a little bit older than that when they say, hey, you're a 19-year-old paying people who are, a couple of years older than you, but that's just how the industry works sometimes. But yeah, starting in high school, it was pretty interesting, to say the least. Obviously throwing up so many subjects, and also getting involved in esports at a pretty young age, to say the least, in management. I think I was about 15, 16, still in school, managing things and still studying.
Wow, fantastic. Definitely a lot to have on your plate, especially during high school.
Yeah, it was an interesting scenario. Even now, it's been pretty flat out, to say the least. At least at the moment, working as a sales consultant in a retail position for Telstra, obviously a known corporation in Australia, but it's a nice position to be in, very flexible. Works well with esports, at least, because 9 to 5 during the day, and then in the afternoon it really just comes down to pretty well second job, which is pretty well esports, working both with Fury as a chief executive officer and also doing some other stuff on the side with broadcasting.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess what made you start to go into some esports in high school? Was it kind of, someone else who got you into it, or was it something that really you were passionate about?
So weirdly enough, back in the day when I was a bit younger, I think I was about 13, 14. I'm not sure if you're aware of Lachlan or Craft Battle Duty. He's pretty popular in the Fortnite scene.
Yep.
When I was a kid, I actually used to play Minecraft with him. So that started back in the day when I was doing moderation and administration for him on a server.
Right.
Bit of a weird start, to say the least. That's kind of like how I started, I guess, managing people and getting to know people a little bit more. And from that point, a couple of my mates basically introduced me to Counter-Strike. So a lot of my friends used to, obviously, at that age, maybe play some games together, and then eventually one of them picked up this FPS game, and we're like, hey, maybe we should give that a run. And since that point, pretty well, it's just been out of control. I've been playing CS for over 6 years. I've had a fair share of games just playing it competitively in the lower leagues, as well as Valorant even recently, where I've done broadcasting for that and also paid it a little bit competitively as well in, I think, the second highest LPL league with a bit of a meme team. It was a bit funny how we got there originally, but yeah, it was quite an interesting scenario. It was a great time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, as you said before, big shout out to you. You know, being 19 and obviously being in that consultant role at Telstra, whilst also managing an esports org. Some awesome stuff, man. Big shout outs to you. And it's kind of funny enough because recently, just after I finished my graduation from uni, I was looking to get into a little bit of a Christmas casual role, and I actually applied for Optus in the same similar role. But I ultimately turned that down just because I got a few multiple offers. But that's really interesting. Yeah, how do you find that role?
It's interesting to say the least. You meet a lot of different people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of like living two lives. A lot of people at work, when I started out, I was not really the most social person around because at least during high school, I used to obviously do esports on the side, so not really much time to socialize when you're managing and playing. But heading into work when I started out there about a year and a half ago, I was like living two lives. Everyone was asking all these questions and how they're getting involved in the esports stuff. I'm like, oh, this is sick, because I didn't actually think most people would think of it in that aspect. But it turns out if you actually open up to some people who might not even be aware of this industry, like they play games, right, but they don't know about any of the side jobs that you can get out of it, and they're actually pretty intrigued and actually supportive of that.
Yeah, for sure. I can definitely relate to that, especially in my current position. One of the other ladies who came in, she actually asked, "What's esports?" And she plays games. She plays, Xbox or whatever, PlayStation. But she didn't know, wasn't familiar with the term esports. So I think it's definitely, a thing that people have a knowledge of, obviously through the media or through whatever it may be. But yeah, at the borderline, there is that kind of, underground knowledge.
Yeah, definitely. Like, you've always got to open up your doors a little bit to let people in, and in some situations can be great because some of the most supportive people you can meet are really just the ones that you haven't actually told about these things. Like, even for my parents, for the most part, they didn't know about this until about maybe a year ago. So I've been keeping that on the down low, and they're still pretty on board with everything, pretty supportive. Obviously, you got to make money somehow, so Telstra's on the side, but
Fantastic, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very good spot to be in at the moment.
Yeah, definitely great to have that support network for sure. So, so tell us, how did you get involved with Fury? How did you, get into that CEO position? Was it a matter of starting from the ground up? Was that a matter of coming together with a few other people and starting to really organize, how this organization is going to work? Take us through that.
Yeah, so I've been in Fury for about a year and a half. Not as long as you'd think. The org's been open for about, I think, 3 years or so. When I was just turned 17, I was in charge of a small org in the amateur scene, which I think it was called Venture. I ran that with two mates of mine who I used to play CS with, and we ran that up a little bit. It was a nice little startup project, and eventually I had these guys basically approach me who were basically the original owners. So one of them being Venom, who's currently with me as a colleague, and another one being Blackie, who's currently the founder of the org. And they took me in as a social media role, actually, originally. Right. So it was a bit of a weird spot to be in. I go from a management position and also owning some teams, and then get thrown into a social media role at a much bigger brand overall, which, at least at the time, it was a great opportunity to take for me as a 17-year-old. It was a bit of a weird spot for me to be in. I was wondering, what are these guys seeing me? I don't know why they give me this opportunity, but when that does arise, you really just got to take it up. And eventually one thing really led to another, and eventually I went from social media to more of a general manager role. And then just with so much commitment and hard work, I got given the opportunity to actually get to this executive officer position. And since then, it's just been a blast, honestly.
Fantastic. And throughout that kind of transition from social media to general manager to CEO, did you find yourself having to quickly mature? Obviously being at that younger age, obviously having a lot more responsibility, of course, going into those high positions. or was it always, being in that previous org, you already had that kind of baseline maturity, you just knew what had to be added on?
Yeah, I think that has some part in it, honestly. At least when I was 17, 18, I think, at least at my age, a lot of people said I was pretty mature for at least how what I am. And even with that, on my side job before Telstra, I used to work at McDonald's. And in that position, I used to be more of a trainer and a manager position. So through that as well, it kind of led me into a bit more leadership related stuff as well. So that did pretty well support me, I'd argue, at least heading into that position. But there's just so much going on. Like there's always something you're learning, even now. As we're growing, there's just so much because I'm so young and most other people in the org are like 6, 7 years on me. So there's still so much
Yeah.
I'm learning at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's where you have such an advantage though, right? Because, coming in that young age, I think as we progress, maybe in the next 5, 10 years, you're going to see a lot younger people entering esports, and being able to have that kind of familiarity with entering the scene, that's going to really help you and give you a bit of a leverage, I think.
Yeah, even as it stands at the moment, there's been plenty of new individuals that I've been talking to and mentoring a little bit because at least most of these kids coming in are mainly around the 16, 17-year-old age, which ironically is when I started. And it's
Mm.
not like I have a massive jump on them in years, obviously, but it's such a good thing to teach new people how to do certain things because obviously, as a lot of people do know, Oceania and Australia, AU, NZ, all of that, like we're so far behind most of the other
Hmm.
industries and other continents and countries. And it's, it can be a struggle sometimes, but the only way we can do that is obviously by building from the ground up. And it really does start with the youth in the industry.
Right. And, having that knowledge that obviously, EU and A, in terms of the orgs, in retrospect, obviously they have so much growth, they have so much baseline foundation. Whereas over here in OCE, obviously we've got these great, fantastic orgs, but they're probably not as competitive as those ones over there. So does that add extra pressure on yourself?
Um, in some scenarios, I think
Hmm.
at least the goal for us at the moment, we're really just trying to prove ourselves.
Yep.
A lot of other orgs, if I had to name some, probably like your Legacy, Order, Chiefs, mainly those three, they do have a lot on us. They've been open for a lot longer, obviously, and they've got individuals who really know what they're doing. And we're just trying to prove that we can run with the big dogs in this region pretty well. And we're slowly getting there. It may take a little bit longer, but there's definitely some good things coming for us. And it all starts with a dream, right? Everyone's got to have a goal,
Yeah.
at least for what you're trying to achieve. And at least for us, we're really just trying to put OCE on the map.
Yeah, for sure. And I really admire that, man. Definitely back when I used to play with a few mates in COD 4 Pro Mod, back in the Cyber Gamer days here in OCE, we used to do scrims, we used to do all that, kind of push into maybe like CGM, had a few mates in CGI, which was the highest level at that time. And, we always had that kind of underlying goal, to create that team, to kind of push it to see where we can go. But I always had that kind of vision, thought maybe an org, but I guess I never really knew how to start one. So how did you go ahead with that process initially with those two mates you talked about before? Was it more so, okay, we're going to try and start to, try and recruit some teams. We're going to try and, kind of set this baseline foundation.
At least the idea of the time, back then, at least in the amateur side of things, wasn't really a brand um, that would really know what they were doing specifically and how to treat at least players correctly. A lot of the
Mm.
more developed orgs definitely knew how to do so, but they're looking at the higher up in the scene. Obviously, they're looking to try and get the biggest and best in some scenarios. But for us, we saw it as an opportunity to basically start out our own little organization where we could pick up some teams and really just nurture them and really just show them how to basically benefit themselves as players. And really, since that point, a lot of those players who had joined us originally, they've gone on to bigger and better things. And in those scenarios, you really do develop alongside your players and become a lot more aware of what they're trying to get from you as learning how organizations run, because it's not every single player that walks in the door and gets signed to a team. And from there,
Hmm.
it's really just about learning, how to operate together with your manager or with the organization as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I guess as you said before, initially just providing that opportunity to some of these guys, some of these guys have that vision to, be a part of an org, be kind of in that kind of team culture. within a team. And I think that, being able to provide that initial opportunity, and as you said, obviously not all guys get signed. Obviously not all contracts are long and lasting. Pretty big high turnover rate. But it all starts with that opportunity, as you said. So I think it is. I think it's really special. I think I really admire you from starting it at that young age.
I appreciate it. It's definitely something I'd urge a lot of people to take up. Obviously, talk to people who have been in that position in the past to at least learn the basics. At least for a lot of people starting out who create a brand and try to develop it, they jump in way too quick, and you really do see a lot of rapid turnover in the scene with a lot of different brands dying out because no one really understands how to manage and not just completely overkill the org. Like, you go out and sign all these teams and not really commit to just one single focus for an extended period of time.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess is that another kind of thing that you have to kind of think about as well, not going for too many teams? Because obviously, if you have a lot more teams, there's a lot more focus needs to be spread out throughout the teams, or is it better to kind of focus on maybe like one or two at the start?
I'd probably say start with what you're familiar with, because at least with us, when I started back then, we started with a CS team because all three of us came straight out of CS. So we knew players and individuals, so we actually knew the scene. So whatever the players needed, whether it was fees or leagues, whatever they needed, we actually knew what we were doing. And even after that position, we moved more into the COD side of things as well, where we actually knew some individuals who played Call of Duty in those higher up leagues, and eventually that led to a LAN. And even with the FGC scene being with Smash Bros. Ultimate, that was another one we also got involved with because a lot of us actually played the game ourselves. So it was small things like that. You really just got to start off small and then, expand your network a little bit, but you don't really want to just go balls deep straight away.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make because I think a lot of people have that vision of kind of rushing the process. You create your org, you get your teams, you go play, and I think that being able to, as you said, take that nurturing time to, I guess, take a step back and have that familiarity with where you want to go down, and obviously having that background in CS and then going in and trying to work with a CS team. Very smart, and I love that.
Yeah, you've always got to start small. You don't want to just go straight away and try to get the biggest and best. You really just got to learn for yourself, honestly. It's not every day you typically get to learn certain scenes. Even these days, I'm still learning about games like that we've entered in that I normally play. And at least when you sign teams in a different game, you really just got to learn it. Otherwise, you just don't know what they need. And I guess that's the good thing about esports. Like, you're so dedicated to just one game when you're just playing it, but then when you really open your horizons, you're going to see there's so much more out there, and you may even start playing some games you might actually enjoy and even watch.
Yeah, definitely being able to be involved in multiple games eventually down the line when you've grown to as big as you guys are, and then being able to explore those different smaller opportunities. I think it really shines a horizon on what's possible and what's possible for the future as well, going in and expanding even further.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of opportunities out there for people. It just really depends on where you're going to start, honestly, and then from there, you really just got to learn how to work your way up. Honestly, everyone's got it in them to get far. I guess it just really comes with the commitment, and you got to have the drive to actually push yourself to the limit.
Yeah, right. One thing I was really curious about is, so what happens with the scouting process? So how do you guys go out and find players? Is it rather going through Twitch, watching some lower Twitch streamers? Is it basing people off performance, basing people off audience value? How do you guys try and go out and kind of micromanage who you guys want to try and sign?
It's a good question to ask. I guess the first thing I'll say, when people message us through email or Twitter DMs, typically you don't normally get a response in that situation. At least mainly through Twitter. I know a lot of young teams and players just hit the DMs thinking they're going to get signed by this brand, but it's not as simple as that. I know we all have big dreams, obviously. I know when I was starting out as a player, I used to hit the DMs of orgs all the time going, hey, sign us, we're actually this good. Which, it does happen sometimes. Like, everyone's got expectations. And at least when you are scouting teams and you're looking at the teams, there's a lot that goes into it. At least in these days, we've gone through numerous teams and numerous scenes. Obviously, we've had situations where we scout a team, we sign them, and then a little bit later, it's just been so difficult to actually monitor these guys because we didn't do it correctly. And not everyone's going to get it right. Everyone makes those mistakes. And that's really just how you learn how to really research these teams, whether it's through placements or how long that team's actually been together for. So I'd probably say longevity in a roster and also the side of things of how committed they're actually going to be. Those two are really the key things that a lot of brands typically look for.
Right, gotcha. And what about, because obviously if a team's performing well at a LAN or if they're performing well online, you know, during whatever tournament, for example, there's going to be competition to pick those guys up. You know, whether that's from other OCE orgs or whoever's trying to look to sponsor a new team. So how do you guys try and compete in that scene?
At least, even as it stands at the moment, at least with the teams we have got on board, we're not going out and getting the biggest and greatest. We only have, I guess, two major teams on board that we really invested in and are at the top of their game. But you don't really want to be going out and grabbing all these top tier teams straight away. A lot of the rosters we have had on board previously, even in other industries, like specifically, I guess, your Fortnite side of things and even some CS teams, we've actually developed them into being better players in comparison to going out and signing these really big, expensive like players. And I think that's another thing as well, because there's a lot of loyalty out there that people don't really seem to recognize as well with some of these teams that I would argue are really underrated.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. I think that going through that development process with these players, taking them in and providing that support that they need, rather than going in and already trying to get that pre-built, really structured team. Um, yeah, I like that. I think it's definitely an important thing to look at. And is it the same thing with individual players?
Yeah, 100%. Like even with management as well, it just doesn't apply to the teams. Like I think in a lot of industries, even in real life, like in some jobs, loyalty is an extremely hard thing to find. Everyone's looking out for themselves, obviously, and trying to get the best opportunity they can. And a lot of the individuals, at least we have on board now, like they've been with us for either over a year. Like since I've joined, I think a lot of the people, even one of the guys I started with back when I was 17, like he's still with me now. He may not be in a position like myself, but he's still there and still kicking really, really well. And he's probably been with me in esports for about 5 or 6 years. Like there's people like that who you really just can't get over. Like they're just so awesome to have on board.
Well, I guess as well, if that loyalty is there and existing, it shows that something's working well. So I guess that at the baseline, you have that kind of pre-built structure that you guys understand what works well, and also how to treat everyone, with that kind of understanding that you want everyone to have.
Yeah, like you got to have trust in each other as well. Even in teams, obviously, like you really got to trust each other to get the best outcome possible. And when it does come to esports, whether you're a team, a manager, whatever, like whatever brand you are, you got to have faith in each other. Otherwise, the decisions you make are going to really decide if you're going to succeed or fail.
Yeah, for sure. And touching on decisions, if there's a decision that needs to be made, or if you have kind of an idea, obviously being that head chief executive officer, is there anyone else that you present to? Do you collaborate with in that team setting to kind of go over the ideas, go over the plan, and what you're thinking, or is it more so, I have this really good idea, I really want to push it forward, and I kind of have that ability to do so?
I mean, at least in our position, I know a lot of different orgs work differently.
Mm-hmm.
At least for us, we've got a board of directors, at least four of us, who consult and have those discussions about things. Because some scenarios where one of us is like, oh, we really want to go and do this. And then the other two are just like, whoa, that'd be a silly idea to do. And you really want to have like those level heads. Obviously, being in the highest position possible is a great thing, but I don't like to think of myself as, an individual that's at like a CEO level. I'm pretty down to earth with a lot of people in the org, and I put myself in a similar level. Everyone's opinion is just as good as mine, quite frankly, because a lot of the people who we do talk to, they have much better ideas than I do, if I'm going to be brutally honest. Even in some scenarios, you can get really hyped up about certain things, whether it's a signing or an opportunity that's presented to you, but you realize it might not just be the best idea at the time.
Yeah, and I think, mentally being able to try and, obviously when we get hyped about things, we try and lose our calm, we try and really overstart to think them. But yeah, being able to understand that, hey, we need to try and calm down, we need to try and go through the process to ensure that everything's really structured. Yeah, I think you're doing great work, mate.
Yeah, I do appreciate that. It's at least a personal goal myself. I like to just chat to everyone. Um,
Mm.
but it's been more of a lifestyle getting into more so obviously with Telstra talking to people on a daily basis. And even now in esports, like most of the management I talk to, but like I like to talk to my players a fair bit as well. Like you really just do learn to gel with individuals around the industry a lot more.
Yeah, for sure. Building that rapport is definitely key because it also helps, as you said before, open up. And, once you start to build that rapport, you start to have those more effective communications, you start to have that kind of reliability, and that ultimately allows you to provide more support. And being able to talk with players, yeah, absolutely fantastic. Just because, a lot of players sometimes will be focused on their team, will be focused on their performance. And being able to try and come in and have a nice chat with them, provide that external support is definitely pivotal for some players. Obviously, because that's anxiety about them and about the performance that they have to try and do the best for their org and represent the team. And being able to have those open conversations is definitely key.
Yeah, it's especially in an industry where so many teams are playing at the highest level, they've got to keep their cool, right? And I guess that really comes down to at least performance and well-being, sorry, for at least our players. And there's a lot of external individuals who can support them, which we have had it in the past. And quite frankly, at least, with therapy and individuals who can at least sit down with certain individuals and have a chat and really get to know them and what their issues are. Like, it's a really key thing to have.
Hmm.
A lot of people think it's primarily skill based, but the mental game, at least in regards to esports in general, whether it's you're a player or even in an esports management position, like you really just got to keep your cool. And a lot of situations, it's just a good idea to have a chat with someone about it because it may be affecting your game.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with that. Previously having on, Shinobi, Rice, Udisoft, all really good players in their own respect. And they've all previously said, being able to open up and have a talk with someone externally to go through the things and go through the movements and try and unleash and take a step back from the game is pivotal because it ultimately allows to enhance your performance because you're taking the time to go through everything and make sure that you're in check. So I definitely think it's awesome that you guys are doing that. So yeah, who were just so did you have used to have like a sports psych on, or who were some of the individuals that you used to previously have?
So at least with some of the teams we had at the start of this year, we had a Rocket League team we picked up who um, I'd say was a dark horse, at least in their scene. So RLCS is the main Rocket League event that was at the start of the year. And we actually brought a coach on board who he wasn't necessarily a coach. He was more of like a father figure.
Okay.
Because these three players we had, they were very young individuals, probably aged between 17 to 20. So
Hmm.
having that person on board who they could actually talk to and trust, um, it was an awesome thing to have. And even the results showed at the start of the year, they weren't even pitched to make top four in that league, let alone make it, because they actually got to the grand final in that league. They lost it, but
Wow.
they said to us, having that figure there to actually talk to and at least mentor them into the mental game and being a lot more prepared for things, like it really does pay off. And
Yeah.
a lot of situations like that, even recently, we have a Rainbow Six team of female players in Brazil who they have actually a sports psychiatrist they have on board. And at the start, when we picked them up, they weren't exactly the most confident, but by having that individual on board, they actually went ahead and won our first championship pretty well for 2020. And
Wow.
in that scenario, it's a good feeling to know that some individual can have such a massive impact on a team where they can just go ahead and win everything.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely see it. I do know that there are a couple of orgs worldwide who, aren't really taking this approach to support their players. Obviously, I'm not going to name names, but they might have taken further steps now to support them. But definitely ensuring that the athlete's quality of life is positive, ultimately will lead to a positive experience in game. It's just, the fact that being able to provide that support, and I love what you guys did with the sports, like I love you guys with the father figure, just being able to get in there and obviously just provide, obviously some players might not be open to it, but just being able to have it there, if the guys do want to talk to them, it's definitely crucial and it can definitely help.
Yeah, definitely. We've definitely had our experiences where we've offered support and players have turned it down. But yeah, as you're saying, there's certain individuals out there who want the support, and then there's others who don't necessarily need it because they know how to keep their cool. But it always does help in most of those positions, and you really do get to, I guess, touch base with more people more frequently after a while because, as I was saying, the mental game is the most important thing, at least in my opinion, with a lot of people, to just have that focus.
Yeah, for sure. And do you see that with kind of like those new entry early guys coming in? Maybe they just got signed, playing in the team, going to maybe their first LAN. There's obviously going to be a lot of pressure and anxiety going to that. So being able to, do you see those guys maybe trying to reach out before more for support, or how do you see that?
I know in a lot of situations, especially with teams, I remember back in 2019 when we had a Rainbow Six team who actually competed at Melbourne Esports Open.
Right.
That was the first LAN event that some of those guys have played in, and myself and one of our other colleagues. I'm not typically someone who flies around very frequently, but since I live in Adelaide, I'm pretty, I say, centralised in regards to esports because everything's on the eastern coast of Australia. But myself and another colleague actually flew over there to actually watch those guys play because a lot of the people there, they have the big dogs there, right? Like Fnatic's the main team at that event, so everyone's just cheering for Fnatic, and then those guys are sitting on the stage and they're like, "Where's our supporters?" And there's always this little group of people who are cheering for the underdogs, right? And I think it's just such an important thing to have those people there. Obviously, having somebody who can help them with the mental game is great, but I would argue like our supporters, like they are just as important. Those guys really do just make the players feel a lot better about themselves.
Yeah, I mean it's fantastic being able to establish such a good positive culture, especially within the org, and that positive culture will obviously relay onto the audience as well. The visions you've built, the goals you've built, kind of the whole structural understanding of how the org represents itself, will obviously have a really good positive effect on the audiences. Clearly that shows that the guys are coming and they're really providing that support, and I think you definitely do see it sometimes, especially. For example, looking at Twitch chat, if a really top tier one team is playing a subpar team, majority of the Twitch chat will just be spammed with anything for the top tier team, and obviously those players aren't going to be seeing that from that perspective. But if you put that into a real perspective, like you have at a LAN, for example, the positives really start to become a little bit heavy, and you start to really think, oh, is someone out there really supporting me? Do we have that many supporters? It starts to become a lot more anxiety inducing.
Yeah, and I guess that's the other key thing. Obviously, with 2020 having COVID-19 is a massive impact. LAN and online is such a big difference between the two, obviously, because online you're in your room, you're playing. It's a more relaxed environment with no one really there to watch.
Yeah.
But when you go to a LAN event, that's where it all changes. There's people there watching. There's supporters cheering your name. You've got to play in front of a crowd. There's a lot of pressure. Personally, myself, I wouldn't be able to do that. I would be absolutely just like I'd be flying. Like I don't know how they do it. Yeah, you've got to have a lot of cool to remain cool on stage. And if it's your first LAN, you're not expected to win, right?
Yeah.
At least from what I've experienced in the past with a lot of teams I've watched, whether it's my own teams, professional teams on LAN, it's always the underdogs who just aren't experienced enough on that. I guess the main stage, and they do crumble. But that's just how you learn, right? Like there's always the opportunity to re-qualify after a while, and yeah, at least in those scenarios, like everyone learns at the end of the day. Some people who have more experience than others do succeed, but that's the positive thing I'd argue about the industry. No one always wins. There's always someone who takes the L, and you really just got to learn from it.
Yeah, and I mean sometimes that taking that L is more of a positive experience than actually winning, because again, obviously you guys can take a step back, reassess the situation, and really start to work on those little pivotal cracks and seal those cracks up, which you might not have done otherwise if you guys have taken the dub. So I definitely think that being able to have that external perspective, and I think I really liked it before. I can really relate to it on that level of when I went to my first LAN. That was in the FGC. So I used to play Tekken 7. So I went, it was one of those small lands in Melbourne, and I brought my fight stick. And I remember, like, probably like through the second round, my fight stick was absolutely drenched in sweat because there was so many. I think I was like 17, around 17 at the time, but most of the guys there were like 20, 25, mid 20s. So it was definitely intimidating. But being able to go through that and experience that helped me set up for the next one where the guys weren't as old, and I was able to really build that familiarity within the scene. So yeah, I definitely agree with, being able to build on experiences and, obviously going to big first lands is daunting, but being able to take a positive experience away from it is crucial.
Yeah, I definitely urge any players who, I guess, have the opportunity to go to a local LAN event. Obviously, when it does become more active, obviously we're still trying to recover from the whole COVID situation, but when the opportunity does become available, I'd urge literally anyone to go to those events. You meet a lot of good people. At least most of the people I've met over the last couple of years in esports, I've never actually met in real life, but those events like your IEMs, your Melbourne Esports Open, your PAX, if you can attend those events, obviously they're not proper, in some scenarios, tournaments per se, but you really do get to learn some things, whether it's your player competing or someone actually just going to watch the game. There's a lot of different things you can learn.
Yeah, definitely. I think, being able to take on those positive learning experiences is just like gold. So what is your ultimate goal in Fury, and what is Fury's ultimate goal in the worldwide stage? Is it to become a competitor within the top tier scene? Is it to, really abolish this whole effective audiences and really gain a really good positive team culture? And what's your goal as well?
I think I speak for most of the corporate team, at least at Fury, when we say, at least on a smaller scale in OCE, we're here to prove that you don't have to stay inside the boundaries. Not, I think we were the first org in this country, at least in recent times, to actually explore outside of AUNZ, because we've gone out to Brazil pretty well with the Rainbow Six team, who's been pretty successful. And even as it stands at the moment, we've even got a Counter-Strike team playing in Denmark, who were brought up from ECA Open up until I think they're in ECA Main or Intermediate, which is one of the top 2-3 leagues, at least in ECA. So at least as it stands at the moment, I think on a smaller scale of things, we're really proving that you don't have to stick inside the boundaries. And a lot of other orgs, at least in the scene, who are at a more amateur level, they've actually followed suit. I know there has been a brand who's come into Brazil as well as a direct competitor of ours, which I think is a fantastic thing. Obviously, having another team there's pretty good, at least on the scale of things, because there's not really many brands, at least in Oceania specifically, who decide to explore outside of our country. And I think it's more so just afraid of what's going to happen.
Oh yeah, yeah. I really like that. I especially think because I think a lot of OCE teams, even orgs. I can't speak on an org perspective, obviously, but I think having that closed-minded vision could be detrimental. And I love the fact that you guys have gone out to Brazil, you've gone out to Denmark, you've started to broaden the horizon, which a lot of teams might not even ever do. So I think just getting out there and even, obviously having that team Brazil, that's going to attract some Brazilian audiences. That's going to attract some Brazilian audiences to the home guys. So how did you go out and expand to those kind of different countries and areas and regions and get in contact with those guys?
So at least the first time around, back when I originally joined the org, the original owners had a Overwatch team who were competing against contenders. They were the second best team, at least they had on board at the time. So at least from back then, they had the networking in the country to at least understand how the scene worked. And since that point, I think about a year ago, we did let that Overwatch team leave on mutual terms. But on a more recent scale, after we dropped our Australian Rainbow Six team and they went to another brand, we decided it's probably time to go and explore other things. And in that situation, the approach from these girls, a lot of people don't really see the female scene as something worth investing in. And these girls hit us up in Brazil and they're like, hey, we're this team and we want to compete for you guys. And we're like, okay, what are these girls going to bring for us? And it was a slight gamble, I'd argue. My colleague was like, "We got to do this. It sounds like a sick idea," and I'm there just going, "This doesn't sound like sounds a bit weird." But honestly, I would say that's the best thing he's ever done, because that team brought, as I said before, our first championship to us that we've been pushing for the last 3 years, and they're literally at the top of their game, which is a very odd thing to feel when you just get a team that you just don't know of. You pick them up and they just have such an explosive start under your brand. And with that, we really do want to pursue more opportunities in Brazil, because I know I've had the opportunity in the past to have a discussion about this with some people who think Brazil isn't necessarily as developed as other countries, but I'd probably say they're wrong. The supporters over there are just absolutely insane. There's so many people who really support our players and even our staff in the org. Like, obviously, we're a mostly English-speaking brand, but our Portuguese counterpart is really good. And even on the sides of things with Denmark, at least we've had our experiences in AU, NZ with CS teams in the past. And I know a lot of people would probably agree, not many teams stick together in this country, which is something I've really been trying to change, at least in recent times. And it is slightly getting better. But what we've established is a lot of players in at least EU, where we went, those teams stick it out for a lot longer. At least the guys we picked up, they've been together for probably about a year and a half. And there's a lot of European teams who have been together for way longer, just due to the scene just being a lot more developed, as I was saying before.
Yeah, right. I think that's awesome. I definitely love. I love the fact that you guys took that risk. Whether it paid off as a gamble, obviously it paid off. Whether it was a gamble, obviously it paid off. And obviously, when you look to the traditional sports scene in Brazil, that's obviously through super thriving with soccer. So I think definitely, I can't really talk about the esports scene in Brazil, but if there obviously is traction there, obviously if there's support, then that's going to lead and obviously be positive for the organization as a whole. And I love the fact with Denmark as well, being able to have that establishment. What do you think that some of the, obviously with in terms of OCE, some teams, their contract, not their contractors per se, but how long they're rostered on for is very minimal. So, what needs to change for some orgs to really try and push the boundaries of expanding rosters and keeping these guys on, do you think?
I think in some scenarios, I think it's more so just the experience that comes with it. A lot of people in this region, at least in what I've experienced or have discussed with, a lot of them don't really have teams for longer than maybe 3 or 4 months. And
Right.
I think that mainly just comes down to, I guess, at least on the CS side of things where I come from, it's more of a cultured side of things, because a lot of teams at the end of every scene, everyone's like, oh, here comes the OCE shuffle. And then everyone just, flails around, finds their own teammates, and comes back together. And in a lot of situations, even a team that we used to have that looked very promising, beating some of the better teams in the region, and they ended up kicking the bucket a couple months later. And I feel it's more so there has to be, I guess, standards put into place for these players and saying, hey, if you guys actually want to develop, you're going to have to stick it out. Whether you have disputes and such, that's one thing. But, if you have a dispute one day, the next day's a new day. Even in my position, I have arguments with people all the time. And I always think of it as, I've had an argument with somebody. I may be wrong, I may be right. But if it does continue to get worse, obviously it's probably better off parting ways. But if it's just one minor thing that could potentially at least turn into something bigger, I think it's probably better to just hit the reset button and then just try again the next day.
Sure. Yeah, redo, roll it back, hit it again the next day. Love that. And do you think that, some orgs don't want to develop and they don't want to spend the resources, the time, the money to put into them, to building them, and, that in case they might not, obviously perform to expectations, do you think that they want an award-winning team right off the bat, so they really don't want to invest?
I think a lot of teams are doing the right thing, at least in regards to they're investing in the right spots, I'd argue. In some scenarios, I think some people are doing some silly things, but that's just a personal preference. At least for younger brands, they do make mistakes, and we still do as well. But I would probably still argue people are just too afraid to take gambles on things. I
Hmm.
remember the first, I'd say, big gamble I made was back in when I was owning that first organization venture. We sent that COD team to LAN and we didn't even get anything from it. I think we got seventh or eighth place out of a 10-team tournament, and
Right.
it was a pretty expensive thing to do, obviously. But a situation like that pops up, and we're like, sure, let's try and do it. You do learn from things like that, and I think a lot of teams need to really just stretch outside their comfort zone. Otherwise, if you stick in the same space for so long, you're really not going to be able to get anywhere.
Right. And do you think that, say, for example, a new land pops up, all of the kind of the big bulls here in OCE try and enter the team, and then you look and you think, is it worth it for us to try and compete? Can we kind of, compete against these guys? Or is it more so a fact of, let's give these guys some experience in the scene, let's put them up against the big guys, see how they perform? What's the kind of mindset there?
I think in some scenarios it is a good thing, but in
Hmm.
others, at least for a lot of developing brands out there, I think some gambles, just aren't meant to be taken. There's a lot of
Right.
leagues out there where there's a lot of entry fees and everything
Mm,
associated with it. And at least in some scenarios, I'd probably argue, at least in AUCS specifically, with the ECA leagues, when you put a team into MDL, you don't really get much out of it. At least the viewership's there. That's probably the only positive thing I can think of. Not to talk badly, obviously, about the league,
of
but
course.
I think a lot of things in this region, at least with TOs that are trying to do something for us, I think there just needs to be slightly more support there, at least in current days. Um, I think your TOs like your ESL, Let's Play Live, even, they've stepped up their game recently, who I've
Yeah.
personally had awesome experiences with. And there's also these little pop up brands as well who are working towards better things for themselves. But I'd probably argue a lot of the TOs really just need to start communicating, I'd say, with a lot of the teams and other management out there.
Yeah, working together to really build up the scene in OCE, because I think that, um, looking previously in some of the CS:GO games, whenever an OCE team enters, everyone's like, "Oh, here we go, OCE, OCE," and we saw it recently with the league as well, when Legacy, I think,
Yeah,
Legacy completed it in the league, and they really showed up, and then suddenly everyone was looking on an international scene. Wow, OCE, well, can they bring this? What can they do? And I think, just that initial first step of getting them guys into that kind of international scene, um, could that be better for esports in the OCE region as a whole?
yeah, definitely. I know this has been a bit controversial recently. We had our
Yeah,
PUBG
of
team.
course.
I don't know if you heard about that at all, but at least with
Hmm.
us, our team was uh, not invited to literally the biggest PUBG event in the world. There's a
Yep.
$3 million event happening next month or in March where the best teams in the region are going to that event. And
Hmm.
at least PUBG Corp is one thing, we think it's another, but um, they basically didn't do their research correctly, in my opinion. They didn't contact
Yep.
us or our players, and we didn't receive an invite to this event. And we were actually rated the sixth best team in the world in the top 50 rankings in PUBG. And obviously, at the time, we were absolutely distraught because it's just such a massive opportunity for both our players and also the region as a whole, especially
Definitely.
in a scene like PUBG where no one really thinks about it personally. You don't see any of the bigger name brands going into PUBG going, hey, we want this team. They're more going for League, obviously, more developed
Yeah.
scenes. But PUBG specifically is just such a big name, honestly, in a lot of the other countries, especially in APAC specifically. Like, it's insane in Asia. And I do wish we had that opportunity, but hopefully it does come up again in the future. Um, it's it's a big opportunity that we've missed, which a lot of us are disappointed about. And at least for our region, I think that's probably a massive thing as well, because that would have been another opportunity for a team similar to Legacy, I'd probably argue, just in a different game, to go overseas and really just put it to the rest of the world.
Yeah, for sure. That would have been insane, especially, from that OCE perspective, having those guys go out into that, obviously big international scene. One, it would make headlines. Obviously these guys are from the OCE scene. They're really trying to make that step. And two, if you guys actually really do perform well as well, that really obviously starts to gain some traction, which would have been pivotal. So it sucks, which is really disappointing. Yeah.
It does happen. we're still butthurt about it, at least with the event coming up. But stuff like that does happen. We do understand that. But at least moving forward, we hope to have those opportunities in the future. At least with a lot of teams in our region, I hope a lot of people do get those opportunities. Just because if I had to write a list out about how many times OCE has been screwed over, I would run out of paper. Honestly, it's insane. But it really just comes back to honestly tournament organizers just doing research and giving those opportunities to different regions.
So from that tournament organization perspective, so what are the prerequisites for a team to be invited? So is it the amount of wins they have? Is their recent performance in minor leagues? What are what kind of ticks the boxes for those guys when they're looking for a team to try and send an invite to?
It's a very weird thing. At least with PUBG, we have no idea. Our replacements, there was 2 teams that went instead of us, not to talk badly on them, obviously, but one of them hasn't performed since the start of last year at the first event where they positioned first. And then the remainder of the year, they didn't actually qualify for the 3 other major events that were performed in APAC. And the other team that was invited actually finished second to last in the previous event we played, while our guys, at least in the last couple of events, have finished top 2, top 4 consistently, which PUBG at least said it was due to COVID restrictions in Australia, but we kind of harassed them with the point that Legacy made it out, obviously, due to exemption from the government, which we were also pushing for, but we never got a response, which I found very disappointing. I even tried reaching out to some brands in NA through, I guess, Jake Lucky and also the Score Esports to try and cover the topic, but in that scenario, they denied it, at least reporting on it, because in not necessarily their words, but it's just not relevant enough because, OCE is just not relevant enough apparently for anyone else.
Dang, man, it sucks, doesn't it? But I guess as more opportunities start to present themselves and, obviously with persistence, and I know you guys are really trying hard to get into those kind of those scenes, those opportunities will come. And, we talked about before, that opportunity can make the difference and it cannot, maybe not entering it. You guys could, maybe work on your craft a little bit more, whatever happens. But sometimes, you see more positives potentially come out of an opportunity that is missed.
Yeah, and I mean, bottom line, what's done is done. And personally, I think TOs are getting a lot better in this region. PUBG as a corporation, obviously, is not necessarily a TO, I'd say. They're more, obviously, the game developers, but at least other people in the region who are running those tournament organizing roles, they're doing a fantastic job personally. The scene's really flourishing as it is. And at least heading into hopefully the end of this little COVID spree in Australia, we're going to see more of these LAN events open up with these organizers running them. And I do think the circuit, at least in OCE, could kick off. I don't think it's going to be as big as some of the other regions like EU and NA, obviously, because they're so far ahead. But I do think we're really going to start ramping it up very shortly because at least esports specifically in our region, it is starting to develop a lot more.
So what does OCE, in your opinion, need to do to become a really big contender in the EU and NA regions then?
It's hard to say. I think if we have the resources, I think sending a roster specifically to another region from us to compete against those rosters would really open up the floodgates. I know there is an opportunity that a team has actually taken up. I'm not allowed to leak this because I shouldn't even know it.
No worries.
There is a roster that is actually going overseas reasonably soon, actually, to compete against the big dogs, which I'm extremely excited to see. And I think that could be one of the pivotal factors that could, knock on that tournament organizer's door and go, hey, we're here. Why aren't you seeing us? And then really just open up the floodgates to allow so many more opportunities in this region to just push out into those other areas.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be awesome to see that. Obviously, being that kind of secret top, we won't really expand on too much, but I can't wait to see that. It's going to be awesome.
Should be fun.
Yeah. So in regards to another thing I was really curious and interested about, because from an org perspective, I love, that insight from those teams. So do you guys have like a training house where you kind of house these guys so they can perform and bond together? Or is it more so, performing remotely and connecting, over Discord, trying to organize scrims that way?
To put it simply, at least in Australia specifically, we just don't. At least myself and Fury, as it stands, we don't have the resources to do it.
Yeah.
It's obviously something every single brand really wants to do. I know some of the other guys have done it. I know Order and Advance specifically have had housing specifically for teams. At
Right.
least for us, I think more times than not, at least in our scenario, I remember at least with our PUBG team, uh, they were meant to have an event at the start of the year and they didn't actually want to go on boot camp together. They wanted to stay at home and play separately, weirdly
Right.
enough, because I think more times than not, a lot of teams that do live together and play together, I think it's a weird mentality to have. You don't want to obviously eat where you work, specifically on your off time.
Yep.
At least I would hate to work for Telstra at home while also having to do other stuff at home. I think it's the same logic, at least with them. I think more times than not, at least with houses specifically, I think they should be primarily used for content-based activities.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess training and specifically development for those teams, depending what they feel is going to be more beneficial to them. It just really depends, honestly. Some teams might prefer to have a team house, whereas others might just prefer to stay at home.
Yeah, right. I think it's definitely an interesting topic because obviously, you look to places like South Korea, for example. Pretty much all top tier, organizations have a big training house. StarCraft 2, League, even CS in those kind of minor leagues for that kind of Asian area region. They pretty much all predominantly have one, and it'd be really interesting to see, how beneficial they are. Obviously being in there and bonding and having that kind of team culture and kind of getting to know each other on more of that personal level versus playing online. I think it'll be really an interesting, even into a research topic, just to see how well effective and the key differences that being in person versus being online can present.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people have the expectation they want to, get a house and start playing with their mates and such, obviously, as well. I'd probably urge a lot of people to, at least in the starting years, don't really overcommit yourself and, move out and start,
Mm-hmm.
I'd say, start up a house with either a team or mates. I feel that's something you really just need to have financial stability for. We could go ahead and do it
Yeah,
right now if we wanted to, if I'm going to be brutally honest.
mm-hmm.
But we just don't see it as a viable alternative as of yet, especially at least the current climate.
Yeah, fantastic. It'll be really awesome to see, where we are in 5, 10 years, where the expansion has grown, and obviously, in terms of different countries, are you guys, looking to get out, past? I mean, not past, but expand, to other areas except from Brazil and Denmark as well.
In the future, I'd say yes. Where
Hmm.
to? I don't know.
Right.
I guess it really just comes down to what opportunities do become available. I'd really love to get involved, at least in a lot of the fighting game scenes, at least surrounding some of those regional areas like Pakistan, Japan, and potentially some other areas like South Korea for maybe League of Legends in the future. Um,
Yeah.
but those are obviously things that we can think for the future. As it stands at the moment, though, I have said this at least in our little end of year video we had last year, but as it stands at the moment, OCE has been great. We're going to keep supporting OCE, but at least in 2021, our primary focus is going to be on Brazil, on our Brazilian brand.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, Pakistan's a really interesting one because their fighting game community is nutty. Some of the guys they come out of Pakistan and compete in all the big Evos and stuff in America. They're just nutty.
Yeah, like I know there's one brand in OCE, Genuine Gaming, who went out and actually got a couple of players from there in Japan, and
Yeah,
I really do respect them for it. It's a scene that no one really touched on, and they've done great. Honestly, they've followed a similar line to us, going into a different country and just taking it for what it's worth. And they've done a really good job in that, honestly. And I really want to get on board with that myself in the future. But it really just depends on what opportunities are available.
yeah, I definitely think that from that expansion standpoint, it is kind of a risk, and as we talked about earlier, it's a gamble. Is it going to pay off? Is the long enduring process of trying to get these athletes on board? Obviously, being in another country, you might not be able to directly monitor them as well. So I guess it is kind of that gamble like we talked about earlier, but the payoffs are huge. And I guess what it takes to really invest into that is one of those questions that needs to be asked.
Yeah, and I mean, for a lot of people, I feel they want to do it, but they just don't have, the confidence to go ahead and do it. Although, at least myself, on my side, I wouldn't say side business. I think more of like a community thing I run, which I think we'll touch on a little bit later. But a lot of those people want to do things like that, but they just need to be taught how to do it correctly, I reckon, which I really do want to help at least a lot of people with that, because I think the only reason a lot of people won't go out and do it is because they just don't have enough experience or know the scenes well enough to go ahead and do it.
Yeah, fantastic, man. That's an awesome transition. So I think we should, talk about that now. The OEA. So, obviously the OEA being the Oceania Esports Association, the big boy. Tell us about it, mate. Tell us about it. What's the go?
Okay, so to put it simply, 2 years ago, myself and a really old CS mate of mine called Zeph, we both started up this little Discord. Basically, originally it was just to have a couple of brands in there, because when we used to own our own orgs, we thought it would be a cool idea to say, hey, let's get all these people in here and start networking. And since that point, in 2 year span, we've gone from 10 members to upwards, I think, of 5,000 between players, staff, TOs, fans, you name it. Like, everyone's pretty well starting to get involved. I know a lot of brands in the space aren't involved. I know up until recently we didn't have many of the big dogs on board, but the Chiefs boys actually decided they wanted to get in on it, which I found absolutely shocking.
Right.
Because I thought all these big guys didn't want anything to do with the little guys, and I just find out they want to start networking with us, because there's a lot of individuals in the scene where they just don't know who they are. And then when you start to learn about them, they might actually bring something more to your company and brand.
Right, gotcha. So what's the ultimate goal for this this kind of Discord server you've kind of created from the ground up? Obviously you've got these, it's some of those big guys starting to come in. You've got those really good networking communications that are starting to develop. Is the goal more so to kind of connect people, maybe up and coming guys looking to get into a team? Is it looking to maybe like find scrims with each other? What's the goal?
Networking, I think, is the key thing. I know a lot of people didn't really know each other up until now, where literally every day chats are active, everyone's talking to each other and wants to learn about things in the scene. We always have those discussions about what everyone's doing, and I guess there's always questions that are asked, like, why are you doing this? What's happening? Blah, blah, blah. But questions are always being asked. And at least in a lot of situations, the networking portion of it's really good. I kind of like to think of it more as individuals being more of a role model to a lot of younger people in the scene. I know at least a lot of us, I think it's more so just across the board, every single org that's in that Discord has really just started pressuring for a lot of players and new, I guess, staff to the industry to start using resumes, because we like to treat it as an actual job. And a lot of the time, for a lot of people who, I guess, want to get into it, they just don't know how to do it correctly. And for us, we have a bunch of resources available that we do give out to individuals about how to, start building these folios and how to actually get the foot in the door. And scenarios, like, it's worked pretty well. And I think, at least for the future, we're probably going to rename it from Oceania at this point, because we've got like Wildcard from NA and some other orgs from EU and stuff in there. And I'm like, okay, cool. This is odd. But yeah, I think it could be a really good thing. I know a lot of people in the past, they've kind of looked down on it because they're like, why are you doing this for? Everyone should be competing against each other. But at least in my head, it's like, our region's getting, screwed over as it is. Why not just pitch everyone together and start helping each other out to actually grow our region as a whole?
Yeah, for sure.
Being competitive is one thing, but, there's a bit more to it than just competition, in my opinion. Competition is all fun and games, but everyone needs to learn.
Yeah, maybe this maybe the hub can be the Trojan horse that can knock down into NA and NU as well. You never know.
Maybe at some point. It's been a very long process, at least working on 3 projects plus work as well. You don't get much sleep. that's just how I am. I've learned to deal with it. But it's it's a cool thing to have. I know a lot of people hit my DMs and ask questions, which, even players ask about contracted agreements. They're like, is this legit? What do I get out of it? And I'm like, yeah, I'll help you out. Like, at least a lot of newer brands in the space don't know how to approach players and give them the right details. And I'm here to just say, hey, this isn't right. This is how you should be doing it. And most of the time they're listening, which is good to hear, because I know a lot of scenarios where players do get screwed over by a lot of people who promise things that they don't actually get, and the same in return.
Right.
Or a lot of people who come into these brands thinking, hey, this is the best thing that's happened to me, and then a couple of months later they just get screwed over. And in a lot of these scenarios, I think it's just a good thing to really just learn and nurture these people into actually knowing what to do in these situations, so everyone has that experience.
Right. So is that because there isn't really a really structured, I guess, overlooking governing body surrounding esports for OCE? There's no real, I guess, there's no real place where, as you said, players can go and ask, is this legit? Is, this contract, okay? How should I go get about, presenting, is that kind of the goal as well, to try and provide some structure and regulation to the scene?
In some aspects, yes. I know there is another thing that was originally started back in 2016, which was the Esports Game Association in Australia. I don't really know what that was specifically for. I think it was more investments and sponsorship side of thing, with a lot of the more elderly, older, more experienced individuals, I'd say, who are more involved with the business side of things, more so than actually developing those people.
Right.
I think, at least for us, at least our goal, we're just trying to, teach people things. At least in my positions, both at work and also in CS, I've just been all about teaching things and, really just giving them the knowledge I've gained over the last couple of years. And it has really just paid off for those people.
Yeah, it's awesome. I love it, man. I love the fact that there is, a kind of person to go to, and, being yourself, who can answer those questions that these up and coming guys who've just entered this scene. They're really passionate about, getting experience, getting in and grinding for a team, really starting, ultimately with the goal to make it. Whether that be to also extend into Twitch, into YouTube, try and market themselves, try and provide themselves, again, as you said, that with that resume to, help them build themselves. There's that kind of structure that they can go to and, get some recommendation.
Yeah. I don't know, at least if anybody who at least listens to your podcast has any interest in, I guess, pursuing those lines. And I would really just say to them, if there's any way you want to get your foot in the industry, feel free to just hit us up. Like, everyone there's pretty approachable, I'd argue. Everyone's there to help each other out, and I would really urge anybody who wants to get their foot in the door to really just come and pay us a visit.
Yeah, for sure. I love it. And you've heard that, everyone. If you're looking for a spot to go, the hub, the OEA, is the place to be. So I guess kind of just sloping down, turning off the gas here and rolling into the finish. Where do you want to play a role in the esports future for OCE? Do you want to continue being that really big, heavy force for Fury, obviously while managing the OA as well? What's your goals?
At least personally, at least my goal is you're not too young to start in esports. That's really at least what I've been pushing for the last couple of years, and I'm still going. I'm still trying to prove, at least as a teenager, that anything that these older, more experienced brands with these elderly individuals who have had that experience can do, you can start young and start to push for those boundaries yourself. And at least as well for myself, I really just want to be a role model for a lot of people in the industry. I know at least through both my management work, I've had people who do see me as that, and at least through my side job as well, through broadcasting and casting in general. A lot of individuals do ask those questions, which I think is really good personally. I'm not, somebody who would turn down a DM. I respond to just about everyone, just because every question is valid, no matter how stupid it is, because a lot of those questions you ask are really going to be great to actually hear that response from. And quite frankly, I really just want to keep pushing for that. No one should really be afraid to ask those questions, and it could really just benefit them.
Yeah, for sure. Love it, man. I love that the fact that you have that vision of, stepping into that role model shoes and, being that kind of voice of reason, being that voice that can be heard as well, that can provide a solid advice. Yeah, I really love it. Also, yeah, let's quickly touch that on as well with your broadcasting. So, so have you just been doing some freelance stuff? So what's been the role there?
So over the last couple of years, at least I think I've been casting for about 2 years now. I'm still
Yeah.
reasonably new to this whole broadcasting thing. I have had a couple of opportunities through starting an ESEA where I'm a partner for that. So that's just through like an MDL partnership program, which I started off with.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, I've actually gone through to LPL, the old CG buyout TO, I guess you could call them now. Myself and Matsy, actually, who you had on the podcast the other day, we actually run
Yeah.
the equivalent to CGI there. And
Right.
we do those broadcasts twice or three times a year for those leagues. And that's a pretty regular gig, I'd say, for us. It's an awesome thing to get involved with. You get to know players, staff, the actual TO themselves.
Yeah.
And at least in other scenes I've had the privilege of doing some stuff in. I've done one thing for Valorant, at least in the early stages of the game with the
Mm-hmm.
Order Open. And at least recently I've started trying to dip my toes into Rocket League a little bit more as well.
Right, fantastic. It seems like that you really are coming in with that kind of full saddle approach. You're at Fury, doing some broadcasting, getting involved with that scene as well, because obviously broadcasting and commentating is, in some sports, in some esports, is the soul of the sport as well. Having that external, kind of commentator over the sport really provides the traction for the audiences, and kind of drives the fun, the enjoyment, the motivation as well for some players. So that's really awesome. But then you've got the Ocean Esports Association, which I'm really keen to see grow and expand as well.
Yeah, I do appreciate that. I know Fury and the OEA are typically my main focal points. Casting is a great thing to have on the side just due to it's a very like a base thing. Like it's mainly done in Melbourne. I know a couple of friends of mine, at least, who do it as well, are mainly in Brisbane and also where I live. And Adelaide specifically hasn't had any major opportunities at all since probably CG actually had their land studio here back in 2016, which at least down here it's basically killed the casting game, at least on land events. But
Yeah.
at least in the future, the goal for a lot of people is to move to at least the eastern states to have those opportunities. But the positive thing, I guess, about the OEA and Fury is I can do that all online. Casting
Mm-hmm.
at the moment can be done online, but a lot of the opportunities that you can get are going to be over on the other side of things at those land studios. And I guess the positive thing for myself, a lot of the people, I like to think of it like this, at least a lot of the people in the industry are getting older. And at least for myself, I've got 4 or 5 years on most of these guys. So at least at some point,
Yeah.
if I keep pushing forward, at some point I feel I'm probably going to crack into the big leagues.
Yeah, for sure, man. It's exciting stuff. I can't wait to see where you go. Obviously, so much knowledge and background in the esports scene, especially in OCA as well. Whether that in the future starts to head into the major leagues, NANU, it's exciting to see, man. I can't wait to see what happens.
Should be a good opportunity. Hopefully, it does go somewhere in the future. But 2021, where it started, right? We're obviously early stages, and this year's going to be pretty well the start of that incline.
Yeah, the start of the avalanche, man. So just some parting words. What advice do you have for some of those guys listening, whether they are just kind of playing solo in queues, they don't really have many people to talk to. Maybe they are in a team with a couple of mates looking to start a team. Maybe it's someone who's really starting to maybe looking to start their own organization as well. Any kind of last parting words that you'd like to really drive through to some of these guys?
I guess for players who are starting out and want to get involved into the more competitive side of things and getting involved
Mhm.
with brands, my number one rule at least is have a resume. I could not express that enough. No matter what you do, whether you're a caster, a manager, a player, have one. That's going to be your best friend. Anyone who has a resume will be looked at over someone who does not.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess
Right. I definitely.
that's all right.
You can go.
And I
You
guess
can
the second thing as well, at least on the other side of things, for anybody who has questions about certain things in the industry and want to reach out, do it. Anybody will be prepared to answer those questions. I know when I started out, even in casting, a lot of the guys who work for ESL, like I've hit their DMs and they've responded to me, given me those advice, and even looked over some things for me, and I've taken that on board. So I guess the second thing I'd probably leave as a parting word is to just ask questions. That's really another major thing.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely agree with those. I had previously on the cast Tim Joyce, who actually helped to start one of the University of Queensland's esports programs. And he just always constantly drove being able to market yourself, just because of how much competition there is, obviously, of course, in this scene. And of course, having that resume, as you said, it can really start to separate you from the audiences. And that really allows you to obviously start to pinpoint an entry. And I think it's vital and pivotal. And yeah, it's exciting to see. So for everyone listening, where can we find you on your socials?
So at least on Twitter, Twitch, those ones are Qu1ckdraw with a 1 instead of an I, because I made you like that with an underscore on the end. And if you, I guess, want to hit my emails, either quickdrawcast@gmail.com, or there's also my business email, which is joseph@FURYGlobal.com as well, where you can reach me.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate coming on, mate. I've always been passionate about the esports industry from an organizational perspective. Previously competing in CGM or whatever it was that I did. I've always had that vision and that wanted to get that insight. So sitting down with you this evening, I really feel like I've come away with a lot of knowledge, and I really hope some of the other guys listening as well have, because we've talked about a lot of really good in-depth topics that are pivotal, especially within the OCE scene, where we are starting to really find that kind of home run. We're really starting to ramp it up, and it's going to be really exciting to see where we go in 5 years' time.
Yeah, and I do appreciate the opportunity of coming on as well. I haven't really had many opportunities in the past to at least express some of the things I've been thinking about and providing that advice to so many individuals. And I do appreciate the work you're doing as well. You're giving so much intel and information to people who may want to get involved in certain aspects, whether it's a player or someone who's trying to lead the industry from the front end. And I do really appreciate you giving me this opportunity as well to speak my mind.
Yeah, man, it was an absolute blast having you on, and I really honestly can't wait to see where we head next in the next positive direction for 2021.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Hope everyone actually follows you on Spotify and all the other platforms, because I know I do. That'd be that'd be a great way to
Alrighty, there you have it, folks, from the Joe Man himself. Thank you very much if you are listening. Thank you very much for making it to the end of this episode. It has been your host, Lachlan, tuning off for a massive episode to kick the New Year's off. And we have some saucy guests coming up within the next few weeks, so make sure to stay tuned for that. Obviously, you can find Mindclickers on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn if that's your forte. But this is me tuning off. I hope you have a great night, and I'll see you in the next one.